Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
The International Court of Justice today ordered Israel to immediately stop its military operations inside of Rafah. While Israel is unlikely to comply with any demands made by the top UN court, the ruling adds to mounting international pressure being put on Israel to change its military tactics in Gaza. That includes from the Biden administration, which halted delivery of certain weapons that could be used in an offensive in Rafah. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also facing heavy pressure at home, with thousands of Israelis protesting the war, calling on the government to reach a ceasefire agreement to bring hostages home. The ruling comes at the same time the International Court of Justice is set to vote on issuing arrest warrants for leaders of Hamas and top Israeli officials over war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Gaza Strip and Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu is one of the Israeli leaders facing the possibility of an arrest warrant, but on that issue, the Biden administration is coming to Israel's defense.
You know, we've made our position clear on the ICC. We don't recognize the jurisdiction of ICC the way it's being exercised, and it's that simple. We don't think there's an equivalence between what Israel did and what Hamas did.
It's unlikely Netanyahu will ever see the inside of a UN courtroom, as the ICC has no jurisdiction over Israel and does not have a police force to enforce its ruling. The war in Gaza appears to be a drag on President Biden's poll numbers. A survey by ABC News shows former President Trump is trusted more to handle the war between Israel and Hamas. Biden, who has faced criticism from Republicans and fellow Democrats over his handling of the conflict, continues to voice broad support for Israel, but tensions between the president and Prime Minister Netanyahu are well publicized, especially when it comes to Israel's military actions in Rafah. Nationally, a new poll by Emerson College has Trump leading by 2 percentage points. The economy and inflation are top issues for voters, a majority of whom disapprove of Biden's handling of those issues. Now, this week, former President Donald Trump made a campaign stop in the Bronx, a heavily Democratic district in New York.
And I'm here tonight to declare that we are going to turn New York City around, and we are going to turn it around very, very quickly.
It's a move the Trump campaign hopes could rally support with Hispanic and Black voters. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign released a new ad attacking the former president over his past comments related to the Central Park Five and calling him a lifelong racist.
Of course I hate these people.
Donald Trump disrespecting black folk is nothing new. He was sued for refusing to rent his apartments to black families and called for the execution of 5 innocent black and brown teenagers.
And it's more than anger, it's hatred.
And this weekend, Trump will come head-to-head with RFK Jr. at the Libertarian Party convention here in Washington. RFK Jr.'s potential to help or hurt both the Biden and Trump campaigns has been hotly debated as a topic among political observers. But the former president's weekend speech appears to show an effort to lure libertarian-minded voters away from RFK Jr. The first ever prosecution of a former president is expected to be in the hands of the jury next week. Closing arguments in the hush money trial of Donald Trump are set for Tuesday morning in Manhattan. During a 3-week trial, prosecutors worked to show Trump participated in a scheme to pay off adult film actor Stormy Daniels to keep quiet about an affair with Trump and then falsified business documents to hide the payment. Defense attorneys tried to poke holes in the case, attacking the credibility of the prosecution's star witness, Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen, and trying to show Trump was unaware of the plan to pay off Daniels. The Hill staff writer Zach Schonfeld joining us to discuss what we can expect next week. But first, let's recap what's happened so far. Zach, the burden is on the prosecution. Did Alvin Bragg and the DA's office do a good job of presenting their case? And what do you think of the defense?
You know, a lot of this came down to prosecutor's star witness, Michael Cohen, who you were just talking about. And going into this trial, the key question was someone who, like Michael Cohen, who is known to, be a little bit of a loudmouth, would he contain his composure on the stand? And don't get me wrong, the cross-examination got heated, especially when Trump's attorneys got there on cross-examination. But Michael Cohen really did, for the most of the time, keep his composure. I was in the courtroom for a lot of his testimony. You could tell he was frustrated at points, but there was never a point where Michael Cohen actually blew up back at Trump's attorney. So I think prosecutors right now are breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief now that they've gotten their star witness off the stand.
Closing arguments are set for Tuesday, always a key moment in any trial, but maybe in this case even more so. What do you think are the important points for each side to drive home with the jury before they head into deliberations?
So I'll start with the defense because they're going to go first on Tuesday. And a lot of their strategy has been not just to try to seek an acquittal, getting all 12 jurors to unanimously agree to find Trump not guilty, but a lot of their strategy has been to find a lone holdout. Who might go against the crowd and create a hung jury in a mistrial. So it'll be interesting to watch on Tuesday when they deliver this opening statement, whether they speak to that point and whether they try to stress to this jury, to speak for yourself and to not necessarily go with the other 11 New Yorkers who will be in that room. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how the defense, whether they really are shooting for an acquittal still, like they've been saying publicly, or whether we see a lot of their closing statement focus on a strategy of getting a hung jury.
What about for the prosecution? A lot of this is kind of trying to tie together all these different parts of the case when it comes to Cohen and the other aspects.
Yeah, I think a lot of their closing statement will be focused on trying to have one last chance here to rehabilitate Michael Cohen, their star witness. Trump's lawyers, they did land some punches during cross-examination. They brought up Cohen's criminal record. They got him to admit to stealing from the Trump organization. Another point, they were really questioning whether this claim he had about a call with Donald Trump back in October 2016 about the hush money payment, whether that was really accurate. So this is now prosecutors' last chance to try to fix up any of those hiccups. So I think they're going to try to portray Michael Cohen as honestly a small part of this puzzle. They're going to say he's just a small, one jigsaw piece in a jigsaw puzzle. And they're going to tell these jurors to look to the 19 other witnesses who came before Michael Cohen and also look to the documents, things like the text messages, the phone records, and the recordings that they say corroborates Michael Cohen. And they tell the jury they can trust him, even though he still has some baggage.
Speaking of those jurors, one of the challenges for the judge in this case is to keep jurors from any outside influence that could sway their opinions. What steps is the judge taking, especially over this holiday weekend? I can only imagine one of the jurors being at a barbecue on Monday. The urge to say that they're going to be deciding the fate of the former president this week has to be pretty worrying for the judge.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that at least one of these jurors actually has planned to go out of town. And when we were talking scheduling, that came up. So certainly some of these jurors do seem to have some plans with their families and are still going about their weekends as normal before returning for what might be, quite an extraordinary moment back in that deliberation room. In terms of the judge's warnings and what he's done, it's been very similar to what you'd see in a standard case. Every day before the jury leaves for the day, he gives them, this set of warnings to not talk to each other about the case, to not talk to their family and friends. Also warning them to not look at social media about the case. Now, he has admitted that, this case is everywhere. It's everywhere in the news. So he has told jurors, if you see it come up on, your Twitter feed or Facebook or wherever, just to simply keep scrolling, or if you're, seeing it on TV, to change the channel. So he's acknowledged that, this case is more difficult than most, but it's just been those standard instructions that he's been giving the jurors at the end of each day, including the day where he dismissed them for this week-long break for the holiday.
And one of the keys here, when the case does go to the jury, they'll have to determine whether the prosecution met its burden of showing Trump falsified business records regarding the payment to Stormy Daniels and did so to help his 2016 presidential campaign. What happens if they can't tie those two things together?
That really is the crux of the case, because the way they've structured these charges is they have to show that former President Trump not only caused these records to be falsified, but also that he did so with an intent to commit or aid some other second crime. So the second crime that they're alleging here, that they have largely rested their case on here, the bump up, if you will, is a violation of state election law. And so that's the narrative they presented to jurors. So if they can't do that, a lot of their case is out the window. Now, I will say they have different theories of what that bump up can be. So, for example, they're able to argue that, a tax crime is a bump up rather than, an election law violation. But just simply the way they've portrayed the presentation of the evidence to this jury and the witnesses, they've rested a lot of this case and the success of their case on whether the jurors agree with this connection to Donald Trump's 2016 campaign.
Now, if Trump is convicted on these 34 felony counts, What could the sentence be? I mean, is it actually possible that Trump could face jail time?
It is possible. These are felonies. They do each of the 34 counts would carry a maximum of a few years in prison. But for someone like Donald Trump, who would be a first-time offender, it's unlikely that would happen, because a lot of first-time offenders that we've seen who have been charged with these charges of falsifying business records oftentimes receive a lesser sentence, something like a fine or something like that. But it is possible that Donald Trump, like I said, could be sentenced to jail time. But the other thing that's important to remember is, Donald Trump, if he's convicted, is most certainly going to appeal this. So he's going to try to tie this up in appeals and delay any sentence. That could take months, if not years, and of course, running the clock until after this year's election.
All right. Thanks so much, Zach. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
The NCAA and the country's 5 biggest conferences have approved a nearly $2.8 billion antitrust settlement. The settlement paves the way for a new revenue sharing model that allows universities to pay student athletes. Under the deal, schools can set aside up to $21 million per year in revenue for athletes. The deal stems from 3 antitrust suits filed against the NCAA for not providing compensation to athletes over the use of their name, image, and likeness. The settlement still must be approved by a federal judge. The Justice Department is taking aim at Ticketmaster and Live Nation. The DOJ and 30 state and district attorneys general are suing the concert promotion and ticketing companies. They allege both companies blocked competition in the entertainment industry, causing fans to pay more out of pocket for tickets. Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke out on the lawsuit. Take a listen.
It is time for fans and artists to stop paying the price for Live Nation's monopoly. It is time to restore competition and innovation in the entertainment industry. It is time to break up Live Nation Ticketmaster.
The companies have been in the hot seat since Ticketmaster suffered a meltdown that prevented thousands of fans from purchasing tickets to Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. Live Nation says the lawsuit won't solve the issues fans care about relating to ticket prices, service fees, and access to in-demand shows. Memorial Day weekend kicks off today, but if you're planning on hitting the road, you're not alone. According to AAA, a whopping 44 million Americans will travel 50 miles or more from home over the weekend. Most of those will be driving. Joining us to break down what travelers need to know before they hit the road is Ragina Ali with AAA. Regina, thanks for being here. Jumping right in, with 44 million travelers, when's the best time for folks to hit the road to avoid all that traffic, and where can they expect the most congestion?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. And yes, 44 million, certainly a big number. The vast majority of those people, about 38 million, will be driving to their holiday destinations. That's actually the highest number on record for the holiday for road travel. So we're expecting the roadways to be busy from the East Coast to the West Coast and everywhere in between. We'll especially expect to see congestion near those busy metro areas. So places like Denver, Philadelphia, New York City, obviously. And some areas, in fact, will even see the traffic congestion increase by about 90%. Areas like Washington, D.C., L.A., and Tampa and Houston. So if you're not already on the roadways, unfortunately, and you're planning to head out today, Friday, you will certainly be in the midst of some congestion. So ideally, again, depending on where you are, so the congestion will vary by region, but we know that the afternoon commuting time is typically a very busy time as we see commuters mixing in with people trying to get out of town. So typically that's a really busy time of the day towards the late afternoon, early evening. If you haven't already hit the road and you have flexibility and when you can leave, we would suggest you leave maybe later in the evening after 8 p.m.
And where are all these folks going? What are some of the top destinations?
Sure. So some people will certainly remain somewhat local, depending on where they live. We're seeing an increased interest in people going to the beaches and theme parks. But when looking at people that are actually going a little further away, Orlando, of course, very popular destination. We're seeing increased numbers there. Also, Las Vegas, we're seeing a lot of people traveling there. New York. We're also seeing places like Vancouver and Anchorage being very popular. And that's because of cruising, because those are very popular areas as we're seeing an increase in cruising across the board, but also in Alaskan cruises.
Now, switching gears to what your wallet looks like for this weekend, the Biden administration just released 1 million barrels of gasoline from the National Reserve to help keep prices down this summer. What kind of prices can drivers expect at the pump this holiday weekend?
Sure. So the national average today is at about $3.60 a gallon. Gas prices have been fluctuating a little bit lately, and that's really not unusual leading up to the Memorial Day holiday. We sometimes do see a little bit of a bump as demand increases throughout the holiday weekend. So we're at $3.60 a gallon. That's about 4 cents more than what drivers were paying nationally last year. But we'll have to see sort of what happens as far as the rest of the summer goes. Looking at things like, obviously, we're looking at not one, but two wars in the Middle East, which can certainly sometimes impact oil prices, subsequently trickling down to gas prices. And we have to see what the hurricane season brings, because that too can sometimes disrupt refineries and lead to higher prices at the pump.
Now, while most are driving, AAA is reporting more than 3.5 million are expected to fly over the weekend, the most crowded Memorial Day since 2005. What can flyers do to better navigate these crowds?
Sure, we are seeing record travel volume, as you mentioned, as it relates to air travel. People are flying in large numbers, so there are quite a few things you can do. Hopefully, you have TSA, pre-check, or clear, one of those basically pre-security where you've already been cleared in advance, for lack of a better word, that will eliminate some of the requirements when you go through those TSA lines. So that may include not having to take off your shoes, and maybe not having to remove different things from your bags, different items such as your laptop or your cellular devices. So hopefully you have that. But I will say I recently traveled to Denver, and the TSA pre-check line, which I have, was almost as long as the regular boarding line. I will say it was moving a little quicker though. So certainly good to have that if at all possible. You also want to make sure that you have the airline in which you'll be traveling have their app downloaded on your phone so that you can check your flights. Also set up those alerts where if there are going to be any delays, you can be notified in a timely fashion and sort of know what's going to happen. So yeah, also give yourself plenty of time. So if you're traveling domestically, make sure you're at the airport at least 2 hours in advance. And if you're traveling internationally, you want to give yourself at least 3 hours.
Ragina Ali with AAA, thanks so much for joining us to break down the numbers.
Thank you so much for having me. Safe travels.
That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.